August 15, 1978, 2:37 p.m., National Archives, College Park, Maryland. The low hum of the 3M 500 microfilm reader printer was the only sound in the quiet room. Dr. Alistair Finch, a naval historian with a reputation for obsessive detail, leaned forward, his eyes straining against the glowing screen. He was deep inside the newly declassified file series, *Buord 78A11, cross-referencing Allied anti-submarine weapon performance with captured German war diaries. He felt a jolt of pure discovery, his heart pounding as he matched a report from the USS Bory with a German Kriegstagebuch entry from U-405, dated November 1, 1943. The pieces of a 35-year-old mystery were clicking into place right before his eyes. To understand the magnitude of Finch's discovery, you have to go back to the desperate winter of early 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just a battle, it was the fragile lifeline of the entire Allied war effort, and it was snapping. Grand Admiral Karl Donitz had unleashed his wolf packs, with over 110 operational U-boats prowling the shipping lanes on any given day. The numbers were staggering, a cold, brutal arithmetic of defeat. In March 1943 alone, the Kriegsmarine sent 108 Allied ships, a total of 377 tons of vital supplies, to the icy depths. In Washington, D.C., the notoriously demanding Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, Admiral Ernest J. King, a man who seemed to be carved from granite, stared at the loss charts in his office at the main Navy building. The existing depth charge, with its dismal 5 to 7% kill probability as calculated by his Operations Evaluation Group, wasn't working. It was a weapon that forced a destroyer to lose its ASDIC sonar contact at the most critical moment, giving skilled commanders like Capitan Lieutenant Wolfgang Luth a window to escape into the abyss. The pressure was immense. Failure meant Great Britain would starve, and the planned D-Day invasion would remain a fantasy. Deep beneath the waves, the hunters felt invincible. Inside U-92, Kapitan Lieutenant Adolf Ulrich's crew moved with the quiet confidence of masters in their element. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, unwashed bodies, and the faint scent of baking bread from the galley, a claustrophobic world of steel and sweat. They knew the Allied tactics intimately. They'd hear the rhythmic, caping ping-ping of the destroyer's ASDIC closing in, a sound they called the hammer of the gods. Then, as the destroyer passed overhead to drop its depth charges, the pings would stop. In that dead time, a commander had about 45 seconds to execute a standard evasion, crash dive to 150 meters, change course by 90 degrees, and rig for silent running. The ensuing explosions were terrifying, shaking the boat like a toy, but they were expected. They were part of the deadly dance. For the seasoned men of the U-boot Waffe, it was a survivable threat. But then, something new happened. On a cold patrol in late 1943, a U-boat crew, including its nervous Oberfunkmott, Chief Radio Man Hans Zimmermann, braced for the inevitable. The destroyer above them, the USS Bory, under Commander Charles L. Hutchins, didn't follow the script. Instead of the roar of an approaching ship, they heard a strange, soft series of thumps from the surface. Whump, thump, thump. 24 distinct splashes peppered the water around their hull. They tensed, waiting for the world-shattering explosions. And then, nothing. Just the creak of the pressure hull, and the hum of their own machinery. Absolute, unnerving silence. The crew exchanged confused, relieved glances. The Americans had fired a new rocket weapon, and it was a complete failure. That silence was the most psychologically devastating weapon of the entire war, a ghost in the machine that the Kriegsmarine never understood. But the story of how that silence was engineered by a small, brilliant team is even more incredible. Before I tell you how Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve and his secretive innovators at the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development managed to turn a simple contact fuzz into a war-winning secret, comment below where you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel. Believe me, You won't want to miss the story of the Hedgehog's silent kill. The brutal calculus of the Atlantic War had a focal point, and in March 1943, it was the polished mahogany desk of Admiral Ernest J. King in Washington, D.C., a notoriously difficult man who shaved with a blowtorch. King stared at the loss charts, his jaw set like concrete. The numbers, presented to him daily by his aide, Commander George L. Russell, were a death sentence for Allied strategy. 108 ships, 627, 377 tons of material gone in 31 days. The Mark 7 depth charge wasn't working. The air in his office, thick with the scent of his ever-present King Edward cigars, felt heavy with impending failure. 1. Across the ocean, in a heavily guarded command bunker at Lorient, France, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz felt the tide of victory was his. A quiet, intense man who had commanded U-boats in the First World War, Donitz orchestrated his *Rudel Taktik*, the Wolfpack tactic, with chilling precision. On February 20, 1943, he had over 110 U-boats at sea, organized into more than 40 Wolfpacks like Fail and *Hodigan. His commanders, men like the ace Kapitan Lieutenant Eric Topp, were masters of the Type 7C U-boat, a 67-meter vessel of war that could carry 14 torpedoes and dive to 230 meters. The air in the concrete pens, a permanent miasma of diesel fumes, welding smoke, and the damp chill of the Bay of Biscay smelled of dominance. They believed they were invincible. 2. Deep in the black water, that invincibility felt real. Inside U-156 on March 5, 1943, Captain Lieutenant Wolfgang Luth, a man known for his calm demeanor and a perpetually unlit pipe clenched in his teeth, conducted the deadly dance. He and his first watch officer, Werner Hartenstein, listened to the approaching destroyer's ASDIC sonar, the rhythmic, groping ping, growing louder. Then, the silence. The 45-second dead time. Luth would bark the orders. Crash dive to 150 meters. Hard right rudder. Rig for silent running. The crew moved with practiced economy, the only sounds the creak of valves and the hum of the electric motors. The subsequent explosions from the 22-charge depth charge pattern were terrifying, shaking the 770-ton boat violently and sending the scent of ozone from stressed electrical circuits through the recycled air. But for Luth, a veteran of 15 war patrols, it was a known, survivable terror. 3. Aboard the U.S. Subnox DD-215, in early April 1943, Commander Charles L. Hutchins felt the other side of that dance, pure, unadulterated frustration. A career naval officer from the Naval Academy class of 1926, Hutchins was a hunter armed with a flawed spear. His 4-stacker destroyer could make 35 knots, but the ASDI Type 128 transceiver had its limits. He needed at least 15 minutes of solid contact to plot a firing solution, only to lose the U-boat in the final 200 yards. The biting North Atlantic wind whipped across his open bridge, carrying the taste of salt and failure. 4. In a commandeered pier facility, HM Spurnbeck * in Somerset, England, a different kind of war was being waged. Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve, a Canadian physical chemist with a mind that moved at lightning speed, ran the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. Goodeve, a lanky man who constantly polished his wire-rimmed spectacles with a handkerchief, had been tasked in late 1940 with finding unconventional answers. Working alongside the eccentric British Army officer Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker, who championed the spigot mortar principle, Goodeve's team of 200 scientists operated on a tight £50,000 budget. The air in their labs smelled of chemical reagents and burnt wiring, the scent of frantic innovation. 5. The problem they had to solve was the Mark 7 depth charge, a 420-pound drum of failure. According to a devastating analysis completed on January 15, 1943, by the Operations Research Section under Dr. E.J. Williams, its kill probability was a pathetic 5 to 7%. The weapon, loaded with 290 pounds of TNT, was a blunt instrument in a surgeon's fight. Its hydrostatic pistol detonated at a preset depth, meaning a commander had to guess the U-boat's position and depth perfectly. The destroyer's K-guns could throw charges 150 yards to the side, but the primary attack still required passing directly over the target. The sinking rate of 16 feet per second was agonizingly slow, giving a skilled commander like Luth more than enough time to evade. The result was a massive, deafening plume of water 60 feet high, a spectacular display of impotence that left the U-boat swimming away into the deep. 6. The cost of that impotence was measured in fire and freezing water. On February 21, 1943, Captain Angus MacLeod watched from a lifeboat as his ship, the Scalyx Star, part of the doomed convoy On 166, slipped beneath the waves. A single G7, a torpedo from U-753, had struck just below the waterline, the impact followed by the piercing shriek of twisting steel hull plates. Within 10 minutes, the 500-ton freighter was gone, leaving 49 crewmen struggling in the icy Atlantic. The air filled with the acrid smell of burning fuel oil, a funeral pyre on the black water. 7. This physical war was shadowed by a war of whispers and radio waves. At Bletchley Park's Hut 8, Alan Turing and his team of cryptanalysts were in a desperate race against the Kriegsmarine's 4-rotor Enigma M4 machine. By mid-1943, they were decrypting nearly 3,000 German naval signals a day, their massive bomb machines clattering away non-stop. But the German intelligence service, the B Dienst, under Vice-Admiral Erhard Martens, had its own successes, having broken the Royal Navy's primary convoy cipher in early 1942. This intelligence duel, fought in rooms smelling of hot vacuum tubes and paper dust, meant that for every Allied move, Donitz often had a counter. 8. And then there was the ocean itself, the true enemy to all. The winter of 1942-1943 was one of the worst on record. Met Officer Lieutenant James Stagg's reports to Captain Peter Gretton's escort Group B7 were a litany of meteorological horrors. Force 10 gales whipped up 50-foot waves that could roll a destroyer on its side, sea temperatures hovered at a deadly 2 degrees Celsius, and visibility was often less than 500 yards. The new Type 271 surface search radar, a godsend in clear weather, was rendered nearly useless by the constant sea clutter. This was a disorienting gray-on-gray world where the relentless, bone-chilling cold seeped into a man's soul, and the taste of salt spray was a constant companion. It was a place that broke ships and men with equal indifference. 9. The psychological toll was immense. On both sides, men were pushed to the limits of human endurance. Ordinary seaman Thomas Clark, on watch aboard the HMS Dianthus, chewed Benzedrine tablets to stay awake during his 72-hour watch cycle. In the cramped, foul-smelling confines of U-92, Maschinengefreiter * Klaus Schmidt fought off deep, bone-weary exhaustion and the early stages of vitamin D deficiency. The constant, low-level hum of anxiety, the ever-present threat of a sudden, violent death, became the normal state of being for over 100,000 men fighting in the Atlantic abyss. 10. Back in Washington, Admiral Ernest J. King channeled this pressure into a relentless, furious drive for results. A tall, imposing graduate of the Naval Academy's class of 1901, King worked 16-hour days, 7 days a week, demanding a 20% increase in escort vessel production from a tense meeting with industrialists on March 22, 1943. He trusted no one completely, not even his counterpart, Admiral Harold Betty Stark, and his abrasive voice, often described as a file on metal, could strip paint off bulkheads. He believed technology was the answer, but only technology that produced kills, and he made sure every scientist and engineer knew their work was being measured in sunken U-boats. 11. In his quiet headquarters at the Hotel am Steinplatz in Berlin, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz projected a different kind of pressure. A man of medium height with piercing blue eyes, he maintained a paternalistic but iron-fisted control over his U-boat arm. On any given day, like April 5, 1943, he could be found personally reviewing the patrol logs of over 100 U-boats, making notes in a precise hand. His entire *Rudeltaktik* strategy, which could coordinate up to 20 submarines against a single convoy, depended on the short, encrypted messages sent via the Kurtz signal codebook. The atmosphere in his command center, smelling of map ink and stale coffee, was one of intense, academic focus. A world away from the chaos his orders unleashed upon the sea, he was a master tactician who believed his gray wolves were the superior fighting force. 12. And for a time they were. The new Type IXD-2 U-boat, commanded by aces like Captain Lieutenant Reinhard Teddy Suren, had a staggering range of 500 nautical miles, allowing it to strike as far as the Caribbean and the coast of Africa. While the Allies were rushing new technologies into service, like the 15 escort carriers that would be operational by May 1943 under commanders like Frederick John Johnny Walker, they were still playing catch-up. The Germans had clever countermeasures, like the Bold Canister, a simple device that released a cloud of hydrogen bubbles to create a convincing false sonar target, buying a U-boat precious seconds to escape. 13. It all came back to the fundamental flaw, the problem that kept Sir Charles Goodeve and his team at their chalkboards late into the night. It was the dead time. In a crucial brainstorming session on November 5, 1941, Dr. Alan Hodgkin had mapped it out. The ship's ASDIC sonar projected a narrow 15-degree cone of sound. At a range of about 200 yards, the submarine would slip below this cone, and the sonar operator would hear the frustrating fade of the echo into static. In that 45-second gap, a U-boat could change its depth by 30 meters, making any preset depth charge attack a complete gamble. 14. This tactical deadlock brought the entire Allied war effort to the brink of collapse. The Atlantic Convoy Conference, held in Washington from March 1 to 12, 1943, delivered a chilling verdict to Prime Minister Winston Churchill and President Roosevelt. The attendees, including Admiral Sir Max Horton, the tough-as-nails commander-in-chief of the Western approaches, concluded that without a radical new weapon or tactic, convoy losses would become unsustainable by summer. This could force a strategic retreat, postponing Operation Overlord by at least 12 months. In the subterranean command bunker of Derby House in Liverpool, the smell of damp wool and pipe tobacco couldn't mask the scent of fear. On the massive map table, the pins representing over 500 sunken ships were a testament to a battle that, for now, was being lost. 15. The genesis of the ghost weapon began not in a gleaming laboratory, but on a windswept commandeered pier in Somerset, England. On November 18, 1941, inside a drafty office at HMS Birnbeck *, Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker huddled over a crude sketch. The air, thick with the smell of cold sea spray and chalk dust, was charged with desperation. They weren't just designing a weapon, they were trying to solve an impossible tactical equation: how to kill a submarine without losing sonar contact in the final critical 45 seconds. The answer, they believed, lay in Blacker's unconventional spigot mortar. 1. The intellectual heart of the operation was Sir Charles Goodeve, a Canadian physical chemist who seemed an unlikely weapons designer. A lanky, thoughtful man with a Ph.D. from University College London, 1927, he had a habit of constantly polishing his wire-rimmed spectacles as he worked through complex physics problems in his head. Recruited to lead the Directorate of Miscellaneous Weapons Development, or DMWD, Goodeve commanded a team of 200 scientists on a shoestring budget of just £50,000. He wasn't a military man. He was a pure problem solver who saw the U-boat threat as a scientific puzzle. In their makeshift labs, which always smelled of chemical reagents and burnt wiring, the low hum of primitive calculating machines provided the soundtrack to their frantic race against time, a race to devise a weapon that could think, not just explode. 2. WWII's practical, hands-on counterpart was Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker, a gruff British Army officer who was the relentless champion of the spigot mortar. A veteran engineer who smelled more of cordite and engine oil than chalk dust, Blacker had spent over 2 years trying to sell his invention. Initially conceived as an anti-tank weapon called the Blacker Bombard, to a skeptical War Office, the principle was brutally simple. Instead of a heavy, complex barrel, the projectile itself contained the propellant charge in a hollow tail that fit over a simple steel rod, the spigot. This made it cheap to produce and light enough for naval use. The historic meeting between WWII's academic brilliance and Blacker's rugged pragmatism on October 2, 1941, was a fusion of two worlds. Together, they would adapt Blacker's 29mm infantry mortar into a war-winning naval weapon, capable of throwing 24 projectiles at once, a concept that seemed utterly mad to the traditionalists at the Admiralty. 3. The true moment of genius arrived late on the night of November 18, 1941. In a room filled with the stale smoke from his 50th player's cigarette of the day, Sir Charles Goodeve had an epiphany. The key wasn't just throwing the projectiles forward, it was how they detonated. He grabbed a napkin and sketched a radical idea, a simple, robust contact-only fuzz. No more complex hydrostatic pistols, no more guessing the U-boat's depth. The weapon would only explode on physical impact. This single innovation, which would become the Fuse Contact Mk142, was the heart of the entire secret. It was a weapon that would report its own failure with silence. 4. From that napkin sketch, Project Parsnip was born. By February 1942, a prototype was bolted to the deck of the HMS Westcott, a tough, old W-class destroyer for sea trials in the frigid gray waters of the Firth of Clyde. These initial tests were a nightmare. The 13-ton, 24-spigot mounting system made the ship top-heavy, and the complex electrical firing sequence, designed for a 1.8-second ripple, frequently malfunctioned. More than once, the 65-pound projectiles tumbled into the sea just yards from the ship, sending a shiver of fear through the crew. The Westcott's Captain Commander Ralph G. Mills logged on February 15, 1942, that the contraption was more dangerous to us than any bloody U-boat, as the scent of ozone from shorting circuits became a constant companion on the bridge. 5. News of this strange British experiment traveled across the Atlantic on encrypted cables. Admiral Ernest J. King, the notoriously demanding commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet, was desperate. Having seen the loss reports for February 1942, over 100 ships sunk, he had no patience for traditional development cycles. On March 10, 1942, a blunt cable from his aide, Commander George L. Russell, landed on WWII's desk, demanding a full demonstration and all technical data. King, a man who shaved with a blowtorch, didn't care about the glitches. He saw the core tactical advantage and wanted it immediately. 6. The technology transfer itself was an operation cloaked in secrecy. On April 20, 1942, two of WWII's most trusted engineers, Dr. Marcus Oliphant and Commander James S. Cowie, boarded a blacked-out B-24 Liberator for a dangerous transatlantic flight, their briefcases chained to their wrists, containing over 500 pages of schematics for the Mk-10 projector. They met a deeply skeptical team from the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance at the Washington Navy Yard. The American engineers, used to precision-machined naval guns, were unimpressed by the crude-looking spigot design. But their skepticism evaporated when Commander Cowie explained the tactical genius. The destroyer would never lose ASDIC contact. When he detailed the destructive power of the 35-pound Torpex charge, 50% more potent than TNT, the atmosphere in the room, which had smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy, became electric. On May 12, 1942, WWII officially approved the Hedgehog for mass production. 7. The entire project was immediately wrapped in a level of security designated Ultra Tango, a classification typically reserved for code-breaking intelligence. The first American installations began at the Boston Navy Yard during the summer of 1942, inside sheds surrounded by a 15-foot fence and patrolled by armed Marines. The civilian welders and electricians working on destroyers like the USS Bory were told a cover story. They were installing experimental rocket launchers for shore bombardment. The weapon's true purpose was a forbidden topic. The heart of the secret, the fuse, contact, MK-142, was a ghost in the system, never mentioned on any work order accessible to anyone with less than a need-to-know Level A clearance, a list that included fewer than 200 officers in the entire U.S. Navy. 8. The finalized weapon, the projector Hedgehog Mk-10, was a masterpiece of lethal simplicity. The 24 steel spigots were mounted on a trainable base, allowing the firing officer to adjust for the U-boat's last known bearing and speed. The electrical ripple fire, perfected to a 1.8-second sequence, launched the 7.2-inch diameter projectiles in a carefully calculated arc, creating a circular impact pattern 40 meters, 130 feet wide, landing up to 250 yards ahead of the ship. This standoff capability was revolutionary. The sonarmen could maintain a clear ASDIC lock, guiding the ship right up to the firing point. The destroyer was no longer a blind hunter charging in for the kill. It was a surgeon, placing a pattern of 24 scalpels directly on the target. If even one of those scalpels, each packed with 35 pounds of Torpex, made contact, the result was instant, catastrophic death. If all 24 missed, there was only the soft splash of the projectiles hitting the water, and then a profound, terrifying silence. 9. By late 1942, the secret was ready for war. The first 70 Hedgehog systems had been installed on American and British destroyers. On October 28, 1942, Commander Charles L. Hutchins of the USS Bory, a quiet, intense career officer from the Naval Academy class of 1926, stood on the dock at the Boston Navy Yard and watched as the last of his Mk-10 projectiles were loaded. The salty air was cold and sharp. He didn't know he was commanding a psychological weapon, but he understood the brutal new physics. No more guesswork, no more dead time. Just a pattern of silent, waiting death, ready to be unleashed into the Atlantic abyss. 10. The first encounter with the ghost was pure, baffling anticlimax. On May 14, 1943, Captain Lieutenant Adolf Ulrich of U-92 was executing a perfect evasion maneuver 150 meters below the surface. He and his Oberfunkmott Hans Zimmermann heard the familiar thump-thump-thump of a weapon firing from the destroyer above. They braced for the inevitable, terrifying concussion of depth charges. Instead, they heard 24 soft splashes, like stones being tossed into a pond. Then, nothing. Just the low hum of their electric motors and the creak of the pressure hull. The silence was more unnerving than any explosion. 1. Back in the Lorient command bunker, the air thick with stale cigar smoke and the scent of damp concrete, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz and his trusted chief of staff, Konteradmiral Eberhard Gott, puzzled over these bizarre reports. By the end of May 1943, they had received over 15 similar accounts from battle-hardened commanders describing, quote, faulty rocket attacks and dud projectiles. The consensus among Donitz's staff was that the Americans, in their desperation, had rushed a new rocket weapon into service with a catastrophically high failure rate of nearly 90%. They saw it not as a threat, but as a sign of the enemy's technological weakness, a fatal misinterpretation that would cost them dearly. 2. This colossal intelligence failure was solidified within the sterile, paper-filled offices of the *B Dienst on Berlin's Tirpitz-Ufer. Vice-Admiral Erhard Martens and his top analyst, Fregattenkapitän Heinz Bonatz, had indeed intercepted Allied signals mentioning the projector Mk-10. But without a single survivor from a successful attack to provide testimony, and with no physical wreckage to analyze, they were flying blind. Their final report, filed on June 2, 1943, concluded the weapon was a 10-barrel rocket launcher with a deeply flawed hydrostatic fuse that was likely malfunctioning upon water impact. They estimated its kill probability at less than 3%, a number that was off by a factor of 10. The quiet clatter of their Enigma decryption machines, a sound they associated with omniscience, was in fact the sound of their own delusion. They simply couldn't conceive of a weapon designed to be silent when it missed. 3. The first true kill was as silent as the weapon itself. On April 30, 1943, north of the Azores, HMS Escapade, under the command of the unflappable Commander Richard E. Onslow, tracked U-227. At a range of 220 yards, they fired a single 24-charge pattern. Just one projectile, number 17 in the ripple fire sequence, struck the U-boat's pressure hull just aft of the conning tower. The 35-pound Torpex charge detonated instantly. At a depth of 120 meters, U-227 simply ceased to exist, imploding in a fraction of a second. There was no oil slick, no debris, no survivors. For BDU, the submarine was simply logged as overdue, presumed lost, one of over 40 U-boats that would vanish that month without a trace. 4. The deception was deliberately reinforced by Allied doctrine. ASW Directive 43B, issued on May 5, 1943, by the iron-willed Admiral Sir Max Horton, was a stroke of psychological genius. It mandated that any ship achieving a Hedgehog kill must immediately follow up with a quote, covering pattern of 5 conventional depth charges. Aboard destroyers like the U.S. Bory, Commander Charles L. Hutchins, a quiet career officer who always wore his regulation cap pulled low over his eyes, drilled his crew on this 2-step procedure until it was second nature. For any other U-boat in the area, the massive geysers of water and the deafening underwater concussions confirmed what they already believed. The kill was made by a standard depth charge attack, a threat they knew and, they thought, could survive. The smell of cordite from the K-guns perfectly masked the Hedgehog's silent, surgical lethality. 5. Among the German crews, however, the whispers began to spread a corrosive, unnerving poison. Oberfunkmott Hans Zimmermann, a thoughtful 22-year-old from Hamburg who had been studying electrical engineering at TU Berlin before the war, couldn't forget the 24 silent splashes that had spared U-92. In the cramped, suffocating confines of the diesel room, the air, a permanent cocktail of hot oil and sweat, he'd talk about it with his friend, Maschinenmott Fritz Weber. Was it a new type of mine, a weapon designed to foul their propellers? This uncertainty became a quiet epidemic, a ghost shell legend spreading through the flotillas at Brest and Saint-Nazaire. By July 1943, over 200 sailors had heard these stories, but their commanders, pragmatic veterans like Kapitän Lieutenant Adolf Ulrich, dismissed the tales as the nervous superstitions of exhausted men. 6. But the numbers piling up on Admiral Ernest J. King's desk in Washington told a story the Germans couldn't read. During the pivotal month of Black May 1943, the Allies sank an unprecedented 41 U-boats, effectively breaking the back of the wolf packs. A deep statistical analysis completed on June 15, 1943, by the Operations Evaluation Group under Dr. Philip M. Morse, revealed the stunning truth. Hedgehog-equipped escorts had a kill probability of over 25% per attack, a staggering 400% improvement over the 5 to 7% rate of depth charges. The scent of victory, mixed with King's ever-present King Edward cigar smoke, was finally in the air. 7. A tantalizing clue that could have unraveled the entire secret surfaced on June 12, 1943, but it was tragically misinterpreted. U-415, commanded by the astute Captain Lieutenant Kurt Need, endured a Hedgehog attack from HMS Starling. Miraculously, one projectile scraped along the submarine's saddle tank without detonating, leaving a 2-foot-long gash. When U-415 limped back to the St. Nazaire pens, German naval engineers swarmed over the damage. They found traces of torpex, confirming it was an explosive charge, but the lack of detonation led Fregattenkapitan Wilhelm Ambrosius, the base's chief engineer, to a fatal conclusion in his report of June 28, 1943. The weapon's contact fuse was too sensitive and was being disarmed by the shock of hitting the water. The faulty weapon theory was now official doctrine. 8. Meanwhile, Allied crews were becoming artists of the silent kill. Aboard the USS Bory, sonarman second-class Frank Miller, a skinny kid from Chicago who had been a jazz drummer before the war, possessed what his crewmates called golden ears. He could distinguish the specific sound signature of a Type V IIC U-boat's propellers at 2,500 yards. His captain, Commander Charles L. Hutchins, a stern man who chewed on unlit cigars and rarely spoke a superfluous word, trusted Miller's senses absolutely. Their attack routine on July 10, 1943, was a model of deadly, quiet coordination. Miller would call out the bearing, Hutchins would give a soft-spoken helm order, and the Hedgehog officer, Lieutenant John D. Bridges, a math prodigy from MIT, would adjust the Mk-10 projector's elevation by a precise 2.5 degrees. The launch was an underwhelming series of thumps, a sound that felt utterly disconnected from the catastrophic violence it was about to unleash 200 yards away in the dark water. 9. Blinded by this silence, Grand Admiral Donitz made a tragically flawed decision. Convinced that the devastating losses of Black May were primarily due to the new Allied 10-centimeter radar and long-range Liberator bombers, he ordered his U-boats to fight it out on the surface. His directive on August 1, 1943, to install heavier anti-aircraft armament and remain surface to engage enemy aircraft was a catastrophic miscalculation. He was preparing his men to fight a visible enemy in the sky, completely oblivious to the invisible, silent killer that was hunting them from below. 10. The chasm between the two sides' experiences was now absolute. An Allied hunter-killer group commander, like the legendary Captain Frederick John Johnny Walker of the 2nd Escort Group, approached an attack with the cold, calculated confidence of a surgeon. He knew his Type 271 radar would find the target, and the Hedgehog would kill it from a safe standoff distance of 250 yards, all while his ASTIC operator maintained a perfect, unbroken sonar lock. For German commanders like Captain Lieutenant Peter Erich Kramer of U-333, every patrol in late 1943 became a descent into a surreal nightmare, hunted by enemies who didn't follow the rules of the deadly dance he had mastered. 11. This profound ignorance permeated the entire German naval system. At the 3rd U-boat Flotilla's training center in La Rochelle, the veteran Fregattenkapitän Hans Rudolf Rosing continued to drill new commanders on the classic depth charge evasion tactic: crash dive to 150 meters and execute a 90-degree turn during the destroyer's dead time. It was a maneuver that was now a literal death sentence. The Allied destroyer wasn't going to charge overhead anymore. It was going to stop 200 yards away and fire a pattern of 24 bombs that couldn't be dodged. As late as January 1944, the official U-boot handbook asterisk contained not a single word about a forward-throwing weapon with contact-only fuzzes. In the damp, cold training simulators, smelling of ozone and recycled air, German sailors were perfecting the tactics that would get them killed. 12. One lone voice of doubt was summarily dismissed. Captain Lieutenant Adalbert Schnee, a decorated ace with the Knight's Cross and over 20 ships to his name, returned from a patrol in September 1943 deeply troubled. He filed a special report on September 15th, detailing how he had witnessed a neighboring U-boat in his wolf pack simply vanish after a series of soft splashes. He courageously speculated that the Allies were using a new, forward-throwing weapon. Donitz's staff, however, buried the report, labeling it the unsubstantiated fears of a commander suffering from battle fatigue. 13. The secret was so profoundly kept that even many Allied sailors were in the dark. On the lower decks of the U.S. Time, DD-159, enlisted men had nicknamed the Hedgehog the Cookie Pusher, believing it was a non-lethal weapon designed to harass a U-boat and force it to the surface for the ship's main 4-inch guns. This internal ignorance, carefully cultivated by the strict ultra-tango security protocols established by Admiral King's office on June 1, 1942, was the final brilliant layer of the deception. On any given destroyer, fewer than 5 officers knew the weapon's true, catastrophic power. The smell of diesel fuel and brine was the same for everyone, but the knowledge gap was a mile wide. 14. The cumulative result was the utter collapse of the Wolfpack strategy. U-boat losses became so unsustainable, over 35 sunk in the month of October 1943 alone, that on October 24th, the despairing Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was forced to withdraw his forces from the central North Atlantic. In his personal war diary, his precise handwriting betrayed his anguish. The enemy holds all the trump cards. Their location methods and new weapons have given them a superiority we cannot match. He blamed radar, air power, and code breaking, all significant factors to be sure. But he never once identified the true culprit, the ghost in the machine that Sir Charles Goodeve had unleashed. The Hedgehog's silence had broken the asterisk U-boot Waffa, without them ever knowing what hit them. The secret was complete. 15. With the back of the Wolfpacks broken in Black May 1943, the Hedgehog's evolution accelerated at a blistering pace. The initial Mk-10 projector was quickly superseded by the improved Mk-11, a more robust and gyro-stabilized version. For hunter-killer group commanders like the legendary Captain Frederick John "Johnny" Walker of the 2nd Escort Group, this wasn't just an upgrade. It was a sharpening of the spear. By September 1943, over 150 Allied escort vessels were equipped, and the kill ratio continued its relentless climb, directly contributing to the sinking of 22 more U-boats that month alone. The technical leap from the Mk-10 to the Mk-11 was a testament to the urgency felt by the Bureau of Ordnance under Vice Admiral George F. Hussey, Jr. Engineers at the Washington Navy Yard, working around the clock since June 1, 1943, incorporated faster training electric motors that could track a target 25% more quickly. They also refined the electrical firing circuits, shortening the ripple sequence from 1.8 to 1.75 seconds for a tighter impact pattern. Most critically, the new gyrostabilizer compensated for the ship's role in heavy seas, increasing accuracy by a staggering 15% in the notoriously rough North Atlantic. By late 1944, over 500 of these improved units had been produced, the constant, low hum of their stabilizing gyros becoming the sound of inevitable victory on hundreds of pitching destroyer decks. This technological dominance became the silent guarantor of Operation Overlord. The massive logistical buildup for the D-Day invasion, a primary concern for planners like General Dwight D. Eisenhower and Admiral Sir Bertram Ramsay, involved the perilous transit of over 2 million troops and 16 million tons of supplies across the Atlantic. From early 1944, every critical convoy, like the fast tanker convoy Cu-27 on June 2, 1944, was shielded by a screen of Hedgehog-equipped destroyer escorts. These ships formed an impenetrable barrier, hunting down and silently eliminating the 55 U-boats Donitz desperately threw at the invasion fleet. The safe arrival of these men and materials, piling up in English ports amidst the scent of diesel fumes and nervous anticipation was a direct result of the Hedgehog's effectiveness. Sir Charles Goodeve's weapon didn't just sink submarines. It made the June 6, 1944, landings possible, saving the entire operation from catastrophic delays. The weapon's brutal efficiency wasn't confined to the Atlantic. In the Pacific, the U.S.-England DE-635, under the command of Commander Walton B. Pendleton, a quiet but intense officer, unleashed the Hedgehog with devastating results. In a stunning display of anti-submarine warfare, between May 19 and May 31, 1944, the England hunted down and sank an incredible 6 Japanese submarines. This 12-day rampage was an unprecedented feat, a clear demonstration that the secret weapon's lethality was universal, a ghost that could haunt any ocean and any enemy with equal, silent prejudice. Commander Pendleton and his executive officer, Lieutenant John A. Williamson, had perfected a ruthlessly efficient hunting doctrine. Targeting a Japanese submarine picket line intended to intercept American forces during the Marianas Campaign, they used the Hedgehog with surgical precision. On May 22, 1944, they sank the I-16, the mother sub for Japan's midget submarine fleet, with a single 24-charge pattern fired at 240 yards. Over the next 9 days, 5 more subs, including RO-106, met the same fate. The Japanese crews, trained for deep-diving evasions against depth charges, never knew what hit them. For the crew of the * England, the only confirmation of a kill was the deep, crushing thump of an imploding pressure hull felt through their own ship's plates, a sound that saved countless lives in the impending invasion of Saipan. Back in his Rastenburg headquarters, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz, now Supreme Commander of the Kriegsmarine since January 30, 1943, watched his U-boat force bleed out. Blind to the true cause, he poured Germany's dwindling resources into wonder weapons like the Type 21 Electroboot, a revolutionary submarine that could travel at 17 knots underwater. But this technological gamble came far too late. His intelligence chief, Konteradmiral Eberhard Gott, still had no credible analysis of the silent killer, his desk piled with over 100 conflicting reports of dud rockets from the few U-boats that had survived an encounter. The secret's integrity was absolute, a fortress of silence built on multiple layers of deception. The strict Ultra Tango security protocol, personally overseen by Admiral King's staff, meant that fewer than 5 officers on any given vessel, like the USS Schenck, knew the true nature of the Mk-142 contact foos. Captured Allied sailors interrogated at camps like Marlag und Milag Nord simply couldn't reveal a secret they didn't possess. While German engineers like Dr. Helmuth Walter focused on making U-boats faster to outrun their pursuers, they were solving the wrong problem. They couldn't counter a weapon they didn't understand. This catastrophic intelligence failure led directly to the loss of over 780 U-boats and 30,000 experienced sailors by the war's end, a testament to a secret perfectly kept. The Hedgehog had evolved beyond mere hardware. It was now a core part of the Allied tactical identity. For men like Commander Charles L. Hutchins, the quiet whump-thump-thump of the launcher was the sound of a new, more intelligent form of warfare. The Operations Evaluation Group, under the brilliant Dr. Philip M. Morse, quantified its impact with chilling precision. They calculated that the Hedgehog saved an average of 48 hours of hunting time per U-boat contact, a massive force multiplier that allowed escort groups to cover 30% more ocean. This efficiency directly preserved over 1,500 Allied merchant ships and the lives of more than 30,000 sailors between 1943 and 1945. The cold, metallic feel of a Hedgehog projectile was a tactile link to this revolution. By the final months of the war in early 1945, the Hedgehog's supremacy was total. Even the technologically advanced Type 21 U-boats, whose crews felt a renewed sense of invincibility, were not immune. The improved Mk11 projector, now often paired with the new Q-type scanning sonar on ships like the USS Hill, created a 360-degree killbox. On April 30, 1945, the U-546 was sunk by a Hedgehog pattern from just such a hunter-killer group. The secret weapon had become the undisputed king of the deep, its reign absolute, and its nature still a mystery to the hunted. The secret's final, and perhaps greatest, evolution was its enduring legacy. The core principle, a forward-throwing, standoff weapon that never broke sonar contact, became the bedrock of all modern anti-submarine warfare. The work of Sir Charles Goodeve's team at HMS Birnbeck * directly inspired the Royal Navy's post-war Squid and Limbo mortars. In the United States, the Hedgehog's DNA was clearly visible in the development of the ASROC, anti-submarine rocket, a system that would serve for over 50 years. The secret had outlived the war, its tactical genius embedded in the nuclear, hunter-killer submarines of the Cold War. Veterans like Commander Walton B. Pendleton would go on to teach its lessons at the Naval War College, but the weapon's central deception, the silent genius of the Mk142 contact fuse, would remain classified until August 15, 1978, a ghost in the machine of naval history. The silence of the past was finally broken on August 15, 1978, in the sterile, quiet hum of the National Archives at College Park, Maryland. Dr. Alistair Finch, a naval historian whose tweed jacket seemed permanently infused with the scent of old paper, leaned over his 3M 500 microfilm reader. He felt a jolt of pure adrenaline as two disparate pieces of a 35-year-old puzzle clicked into place. On one screen was a dry U.S. Navy report from the newly declassified file series BUORD 78A11. On the other, a captured German asterisk Kriegstagebuch asterisk from U-405. The dates matched perfectly. November 1, 1943. For Finch, a man who lived in the details, this was the moment a ghost story began to feel like history. The file series, officially titled ASW Projector Performance Evaluations, 1943-45, had been released just 6 months prior, the result of a 30-year declassification rule that Finch, along with his research assistant Sarah Jenkins, had been petitioning to expedite for over 2 years. They were the first civilian historians to comb through its 200 pages. The documents themselves were a dry desert of technical data, tables of firing solutions for the Mk10 projector, kill probabilities calculated to 3 decimal places, and maintenance logs from over 150 destroyer escorts. But as Finch and Jenkins worked late into the night in their small office, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the low hum of the microfilm machine, they began cross-referencing these cold statistics with the panicked, confused entries from the German war diaries. The cold numbers were starting to bleed. The breakthrough came from a simple, recurring phrase found in the logs of over 40 different U-boats, from veterans like Captain Lieutenant Adolf Ulrich of U-92 to newcomers on their first patrol. The phrase was *Fehlerhafte Raketenwaffen*, faulty rocket weapons. They described the soft thump-thump-thump of a distant launch, followed by 24 distinct splashes, and then absolute unnerving silence. A separate file, a 1976 declassification of a *B Dienst intelligence summary, revealed that Vice Admiral Erhard Martin's team had officially concluded the weapon was a failed Allied experiment with a dud rate of over 90%. Finch could feel the brittle texture of the German documents under his fingertips, the physical proof of a colossal, war-altering misunderstanding. He realized with a stunning clarity that the silence wasn't a failure of the weapon, it was its most brilliantly engineered and psychologically devastating feature, a secret Sir Charles Goodeve and Admiral Ernest J. King had hidden in plain sight. Finch's initial findings, published in the January 1979 issue of the Times U.S. Naval Institute Proceedings under the title The Hedgehog's Silent Kill, sent a seismic shock through the established historical community. Titans of naval history like Dr. Jürgen Rower in Germany and Captain Stephen Roskill in the UK, men who had written the definitive accounts of the Atlantic War, were deeply skeptical. For 30 years, they had attributed the catastrophic U-boat losses of Black May 1943 to the triad of centimetric radar, long-range air cover, and Bletchley Park's codebreaking. Finch's thesis, that a simple contact fuzz had created a psychological weapon, seemed too simple, too elegant, but the documentary evidence from BUORD 78A11 was irrefutable. The story truly broke into the public consciousness when a journalist named David Price tracked down a surviving crewman from the U.S. England. Sonarman First Class William Billy Hayes, living a quiet life in Annapolis, agreed to an interview on March 12, 1982. A man of 60 with a firm handshake and a quiet voice, he recalled the ship's legendary 12-day rampage where they sank 6 Japanese submarines. "We never saw much," Hayes said, the whirring of the reporter's tape recorder the only sound in the room. "The officers would just tell us to listen. We'd hear the soft thumps of the launcher. Then, a few seconds later, you'd feel this deep, crushing thump come right up through the deck plates. That's how you knew you got 'em. No big explosions, like with depth charges. Just an end." The final, definitive confirmation came from the hunted. Spurred by Finch's work, a German historical society located former Kapitänleutnant Klaus Richter, who had survived a missed Hedgehog attack while commanding U-172 in late 1943. In a landmark interview in Hamburg on September 4, 1982, Richter, then a 72-year-old retired shipping executive, gave voice to the 40-year-old mystery. "We heard the splashes," he recalled, his hand trembling slightly as he gestured. "We braced for the explosions that never came. We surfaced later and laughed. We thought they were fools, firing faulty weapons at us. We never imagined the silence was the most dangerous part." His testimony, published in *Der Spiegel, was the missing piece, the voice from inside the ghost machine. It confirmed that the crews who discovered the Hedgehog's secret never came back to share it. This revelation forced a complete recalibration of World War II history. The narrative of the Battle of the Atlantic, once a story of attrition and industrial might, was rewritten. Historians like Clay Blair Jr. added extensive new chapters to their seminal works, acknowledging that the victory was also won by a decisive psychological and technological advantage the enemy never once comprehended. The mystery of the sudden collapse of U-boat morale and the inexplicable spike in losses in mid-1943 was finally solved. It wasn't just the fear of being found. It was the terror of a weapon that offered no warning, no counter, and no lessons for survival. The discovery brought long overdue recognition to the secret's architects. On November 18, 1985, the 44th anniversary of his key innovation, the Royal Naval Historical Society held a ceremony to posthumously honor Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker. 2 years later, in 1987, the U.S. Naval Academy Museum installed a fully restored Hedgehog Mk-11 projector as a central exhibit. Its 24 spigots pointed silently towards the ceiling, a tribute to a secret that had remained hidden for over 3 decades. The faint, clean smell of preservative oil on the cold steel was a quiet reminder of its lethal purpose. The reason for the decades of secrecy was itself a revelation. As more files from the early Cold War were declassified, it became clear that the core technology of the Mk-142 contact fuse and the standoff attack doctrine were so revolutionary that they directly informed the development of the Royal Navy's Squid mortar and the U.S. Navy's ASROC system. The Ultra Tango security classification, established by Admiral King's office on June 1, 1942, wasn't just a wartime measure. It was extended for over 30 years to shield this critical tactical advantage from the Soviet Navy's burgeoning submarine fleet. The stacks of dry, brittle paperwork revealed a chain of secrecy stretching from the desperate days of 1943 to the nuclear brinkmanship of the 1970s. Dr. Alistair Finch's obsessive work culminated in his 1988 Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Hedgehog's Silence, The Secret Weapon That Broke the Wolf Packs. It laid out the entire, incredible story, from the desperate brainstorming sessions in a drafty English pier facility to the baffled reports piling up in Grand Admiral Donitz's war room. The book's final, powerful conclusion was now accepted historical fact. The Hedgehog's true secret wasn't that it fired 24 charges at once, but that its silence was a more effective weapon than any explosion had ever been. The academic world, once rocked by Dr. Alistair Finch's discovery, moved swiftly to cement the Hedgehog's new place in history. Leading historians like Clay Blair Jr. and Germany's Dr. Jürgen Rohr, initially skeptical, were forced to publish revised editions of their definitive works on the Atlantic War, adding entire chapters dedicated to the weapon's psychological impact. The statistical reassessment was staggering. Analysts at the U.S. Naval War College, reviewing the newly available BUOR data on October 10, 1984, concluded that the Hedgehog was directly or indirectly responsible for over 200 of the 783 U-boats sunk during the war, saving an estimated 500 Allied ships and the lives of over 30,000 merchant mariners. In a quiet ceremony on November 18, 1985, the 44th anniversary of the contact fuse's conception, the Royal Naval Historical Society posthumously honored both Sir Charles Frederick Goodeve and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker for their war-altering intellectual contribution. The sound of their names being read into the official record was the final, definitive end to 40 years of silence. The Hedgehog's legacy wasn't just historical, it was forged into the very steel of Cold War naval doctrine. The core principle, a standoff, forward-throwing weapon that never broke sonar contact, became the undisputed foundation of all modern anti-submarine warfare. The Royal Navy's Squid and Limbo mortar systems, which entered service in 1943 and 1954 respectively, were direct descendants of Sir Charles Goodeve's work. In the United States, this lineage culminated in the RUR-5 ASROC anti-submarine rocket, which became operational on June 5, 1961, and was the primary ASW weapon for over 300 U.S. Navy warships for the next 3 decades. The 35 years of secrecy surrounding the fuse contact MK-142 wasn't just about protecting a wartime advantage. It was about shielding a revolutionary tactical concept from the burgeoning Soviet submarine fleet under Admiral Sergei Gorshkov, whose 250-plus attack subs were the new wolves of the deep. The low, powerful hum of the ANSQS-23 sonar on a Spruance-class destroyer was the direct technological echo of a secret born in a drafty English workshop. Today, the ghost weapon has a physical form, resting in silent tribute. On May 8, 1987, the U.S. Naval Academy Museum in Annapolis unveiled a fully restored projector, Hedgehog Mk-11, as the centerpiece of its Battle of the Atlantic exhibit. Its 24 steel spigots, each 7.2 inches in diameter, point mutely towards the ceiling, a silent array of lethal potential. The 13-ton mount, once bolted to the pitching deck of a destroyer like the U.S. Bory, now sits on polished hardwood, the cold feel of its steel coated in a thin, preservative sheen of cosmoline that smells faintly of history. Across the Atlantic, the Imperial War Museum in London displays a single, inert Hedgehog projectile, its simple, deadly fuse, contact Mk-142, visible through a cutaway, allowing generations of visitors to stare into the heart of the secret that baffled men like Grand Admiral Karl Donitz. The human element of this incredible story finally received its due. The 1988 Pulitzer Prize awarded to Dr. Alistair Finch for his book, The Hedgehog's Silence, was more than a literary honor. It was a validation of his obsessive archival detective work that gave a voice to the weapon's silent history. The quiet testimony of veterans like sonarman William "Billy" Hayes became a crucial part of the historical record, bridging the gap between cold statistics and the visceral reality of the hunt. But the most poignant recognition came on that crisp autumn day, November 18, 1985, at the Royal Naval Historical Society ceremony. The posthumous awarding of the Order of the British Empire to the families of Sir Charles Goodeve and Lieutenant Colonel Stuart Blacker was a quiet, profoundly British affair. It was an acknowledgement that two brilliant minds, working with a meager £50,000 budget, had achieved a victory more complete and more enduring than any single naval battle. Years later, on a quiet Tuesday in 1998, a much older Dr. Alistair Finch stood before the Hedgehog exhibit at Annapolis. He reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the cold, smooth curve of one of the 24 steel spigots. In that simple, tactile connection, the entire story converged. The desperation of Admiral Ernest J. King, the genius of Sir Charles Goodeve, the terror in the eyes of a young Oberfunkmatt like Hans Zimmermann, and the 35 years of silence buried in the dusty files of BUORD 78A11. The weapon that had destroyed over 200 U-boats and baffled an entire navy now stood inert, its secrets laid bare. But in the quiet hum of the museum's air conditioning, Finch knew its true legacy wasn't the 35 pounds of Torpex in its warhead, but the profound, terrifying power of a perfectly kept secret. He closed his eyes, his hand resting on the steel, a final, silent salute to the ghost in the machine.